Hello again, Irini Hara, streaming from Oslo. Today, another episode for the podcast Autism on 360 degrees. It is a self interview, as I used to call it, while I'm trying to find other guests for the podcast. It's been a busy period, and I had also to slow down. So I hope it's okay if I bring my own insights instead of a dialogue between me and my guest. And I recently received, I'm in many kind of groups and newsletters. Some of them are around autism and autism support. And I received this newsletter from Life Sites News that says that the Department of Health and Human Services in USA, the report commissioned by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. indicates Tylenol used during pregnancy is one factor contributing to the US autism epidemic, together with folate levels that are low. And he also says this reports that is not one single case, there are many, there is an aggregation of causes, and they are developing evidence to ask for regulatory action on some of those or recommendations. And this article also says that most cases of autism or autism spectrum disorder that nowadays are one case for every 31 Americans, according to the statistics, are quite severe of these cases. Many and 25 of the kids who are diagnosed with autism are nonverbal and non-toilet trained, with other dysfunctional behaviors typical of severe autism like hand banging. And this article also mentions measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, MMR vaccines connected with autism occurrence. And it's not that I want to comment on the findings from these studies or statistics. They belong to a different territory than Europe. And of course, it's good to understand that there are many different causes to the autism spectrum disorder. And I think it's relevant, independently of what the study finds, that these kind of studies and statistics are made all over the world, because we know there is a higher increase, a higher amount of cases that come nowadays and will come in the future. But somehow indirectly referring to this topic of the occurrence and possible causes, I would like to speak about parenting again. And what I'm going to say might disturb many parents of kids on the spectrum. But before you actually take action or you try to contest what I'm saying, I just want to invite you for reflection. Because I'm not saying what I'm going to say to offend anyone, but to raise awareness about the fact that in the society we live in, we cannot be blind and deaf anymore about the occurrence factors that the incidence of autism in our life, in the whole society and all levels of our lives, but also the factors that favor the occurrence of autism. And I'm quite active in different groups around autism, education, and support for autism too. And I hear, I see, I read what many parents post there, or even specialists. And there is a whole polemics around the real causes of autism. Nowadays, there are specialists. Dr. Melillo in New York is one of them. and others who already published many books about possible causes. He actually, in the Disconnected Kids book that he published, and you can find it to purchase online, he speaks about almost 40 different causes. And at least half of them, if I'm not wrong, I invite you to go and read the book because it will give you a lot of information, but at least half of these factors that can favor occurrence of autism in children are related to the mother and the family environment. And also possible disease or health condition of the mother. And so what I'm going to say, it's a very short sentence, but then I will try to explain it so you don't get so offended and overreactive, because actually you should pay attention to what I'm saying. In my opinion, from my own experience with autism, with the autism of my son, so I don't have a broad experience with autism of other kids, but with my son, and he's on the, let's call it, high functional stage of the spectrum. So he has some delays, but he also has some breakthroughs and developments. In my experience, by also exchanging opinions and interviewing other people and seeing what's happening around, there is one thing that I think needs to be investigated to the core and better understood also through research. Because from what I saw nowadays, what is happening also in medical field, or even at social and educational level, there is a lot of focus on manifestation of autism, or what are the signs or symptoms, so-called symptoms of delays or whatever in the development of the child. And there are methods that can support further development, but they are not always available to everyone. And there is not enough research to understand the context in which autism appears, the so-called why. And there is a lot of focus on supporting the family as a whole and the child also. Here in Norway, we have educational system and some services that are for free or with the low price for the whole family to be able to assist also the child or later on the adult. But in other countries, there is more focus on therapy, while here in Norway, nobody speaks about therapy. Even speaking about logoped can seem strange for some people. Or other countries, like for example, now the situation in Romania, are very focused on ABA therapy or occupational therapy and so on. And of course, special education in addition. But in my opinion, studying and reading and seeing what's happening around, and also as a therapist that works with traumas and understand the mechanism of trauma, understand the propagation of transgenerational trauma and so on, if we should label, because it's a kind of label, but it's a true label because it explains what in many kids means the autism in their own behavior and appearance. These kids that are, as Roberto Melillo says, disconnected kids, because there is an impairment, a brain imbalance between the right and the left hemisphere, and even the connection of the body is not so well achieved, and that's why they can have motoric issues or other development issues that make their life not so much pleasant, or the degree of autonomy can be lower and so on. So these disconnected kids, if we want to call them like that, they come from parents, right? From a mother and a father. And I will add to this sentence is disconnected kids, that are those kids that are then diagnosed or labeled as on the spectrum of the neurodivergent spectrum. They come most of the times from disconnected parents. And don't take it as an offense. I include myself in the category, if it makes you feel better. And I'm going to try to explain what it means. So when I speak about disconnection, on one hand, I reflect on what specialists, as Menilo say, that there is an imbalance or an impairment in the development of these children because different causes, but it's about the brain, it's about the body, the whole functioning of the system that is the body. And disconnection from a more, let's call it, trauma-informed perspective also means little awareness of a person around its own trauma biography, around the splits that the trauma creates. And you will ask me then what it means that traumatized parents will always have disconnected kids or kids on the spectrum. No, not necessarily, because we all are, to a certain extent, carrying traumas around our life. We live in a society with a mentality, with a way of living that is highly traumatizing. But then the question would be why only certain parents then have kids, and not all the kids in a family, for example, have autism or are in the spectrum. Sometimes there are kids that are on a more normal functional, to call it like that, and then there is one or two, or even all the kids in that family that have autism. And there should be a better understanding and exploration, even through research, of how trauma, especially the developmental trauma that starts to happen since the conception and in the uterus and out of the uterus after the birth, insights on the appearance of these development delays that then later on will be labeled or cataloged as autism spectrum disorder. And this study that has been nowadays presented by J.F. Kennedy has its role and has its meaning to raise awareness about the fact that mothers can have a big contribution through their own health state or the medication they receive in the increase of the risk of autism spectrum disorder. And again, I don't want to blame anyone about this. I just want to make you reflect and raise awareness about different conditions, different situations that can occur that make this possible. And I already spoke in other episodes also about the fact that I consider the autism spectrum disorder also manifestation of multiple, multi-layered transgenerational trauma because it is a systemic dysfunction. So somewhere in the family, there were dynamics that later on will also at an energetic subconscious level will trigger genetic modifications or a situation that can increase the risk of autism. But this is my conviction, and based on my own observations and some work I did on myself, including my son, I cannot extrapolate, but I have this like nudge or intuition that if someone one day would want to research into depth into transgenerational trauma and work in therapeutic setting and also do statistical studies, there might be a clue there. But then let's return to the topic of disconnected parents. And I will focus on disconnected mothers because the mother's role is always fundamental, as the mother carries the child inside her womb for more or less 9 months. And she's one of the players in bringing life into the family, and her connection or disconnection with herself, with her own body, with her own psyche, with her own lineage, can actually manifest in different ways also in the way she connects with the child. And what I often see around me, and even when I speak with the mothers of kids on the spectrum, is a lot of overwhelming states. Sometimes it might be that mothers are completely unaware of the possible causes of the autism, or they try to investigate, and then, of course, there are all sorts of theories, and some of them might be true, others might be less. Nevertheless, independent of the cause, many mothers are often not aware of how important is to actually start developing a connection with themselves, because this will lead to an improvement in the way they perceive their own children, especially those on the spectrum, and in the way they can support the development of these kids. And I also often read among the stories that are circulating, and testimonials, personal testimonials in these communities or groups, a lot of parents inquiring about medicines, pills, syrups of all sorts that they give to their children even in a very early age. And probably this medication is officially recommended by the medical system in those places or countries, but most of them are either inefficient or they can actually disturb even more the health condition of the child or children. And then they turn desperate for advice to other people trying to understand what is happening. And I want to make you, as if you are a mother and you listen today, to reflect on your own history of life, on your own biography of traumas. If you never did this screening, this looking back to yourself, to your life, to your childhood, or investigate it more if you don't have enough information into it, I would invite you to do so, because this is one first step you can take towards reconnecting with what happened to you and how affected you, also on a mental, emotional, psychological level, and in your health state. And not only reflect, but investigate and try to see how much those events from the past impacted you, and also how you can reverse their negative effects, because there is a way through therapy you can do it. And then look back to your lineage of mothers, in your mother's lineage. Hear or investigate those stories of birth, of conception, or development of the pregnancy, and see if it's anything there that can bring a clue that there was a disruption in this lineage that still influences you, your life, and your child's life. Because as we go deeper and we look into this hidden mechanism of the subconscious, into the collective, into the lineage stories, we often find something that has created a disruption, that has created disease, that can contribute to dysfunction, not only in the family, but in the generations that come after. And so I was saying that this would be a first step to go back in time and retrieve that information that can support you. This is usually called in medical terms anamnesis. You have to reflect and remind yourself of all those difficult moments or traumatic events from the lineage, the ancestors behind you, but also in your life, at the beginning of life, that put a mark on you. Because many things that you can suffer nowadays, and that can increase the occurrence of autism for our offspring, like gain of weight, gestational diabetes, or often an advanced age for having a child, because nowadays we We don't give birth anymore at 18 or 20, 25, but much later after 30 or 40. Even difficulties with procreation or abortion, stillbirth, or whatever it happened into your womb, if it happens, know that all these are major sources of disconnection, but also of risk, because they all create trauma, and trauma impacts the body, impacts the brain development, impacts the nervous system, and so on. And I believe that informing yourself and taking this first step for yourself, it doesn't have to be with a therapist, but of course you can be guided in these processes. There can be so many layers that you need to explore to really understand and to really retrieve that information, and then to be able to go on and do something about it. But this first step is already a good key for resolution and for progress in the connection with your own child, especially if it is on the spectrum. And I'm saying this also based on my own experience, because when I had my child, I was already quite in age. I was almost 40, 38 actually. I had the gestational diabetes in the end of my pregnancy, like last month. And I was a little bit overweight. And of course, I'm a highly educated, I have a PhD, highly educated person that is already considered a risk factor, because it is also seen that many families with higher education, with degrees at college or university, their offspring can manifest autism too. I was delivering my baby in a country that is not my native country. This can be another risk factor, and so on. So at that time, when my baby was born, I didn't know. I didn't even know what means autism, or how it manifests, how much difficulties can bring to my life. But then at a certain point, after my son was born, I started to understand that exploring my subconscious and retrieving something from inside was important for me, because I was wondering, I was not so much aware of what I was carrying. And all those signs of giving birth to a child later, or choosing to be single parent even, and having some health issue even during the pregnancy, I had to take antibiotics because I got some urinary infection and so on. All those aspects of my life in that moment as a pregnant woman, I didn't pay attention to them. I didn't even know where they are coming from. I thought it's normal for a person of my age to have this or that and go through this and that. But nowadays, knowing what I know, after working with other people and working with myself, also from a trauma-oriented perspective, I look back and I say, I wished I have known at that moment when actually I decided to have a child, all that I know today. Because this is the second step I would recommend you to take, to inform yourself and to not believe to everything that is told, because there are many stories, even those on the vaccines and medicines. Sometimes there might be exaggeration, or there is a lot of truth in this, and then you have to explore. And you as a parent, you can actually decide if you want to vaccinate or not your child for a certain disease. I think my child was, we were in Portugal at the time, and there was a national plan of vaccination, and he was given vaccines from early stage of life. So I'm not sure how much those vaccines impacted on him. If I should hear several stories, probably I would say yes, there might be some influence, but I mean, those vaccines are also given to other children. So why my son got all the symptoms that he has or he used to have, because some of them already improved and not others of his age. Of course, there are to be mentioned other causes like genetic factors. The epigenetics already started to explain what is happening in the our body at the genetic level and what can actually kind of factors, environmental factors or impactful events as a traumatic event can alter the genetic configuration and create all sorts of imbalances. And I know there is something that he inherits from the father, for example. And this is something I actually knew even before he was born, because we had to do some analysis to identify who was transmitting this genetic modification and so on. But again, what I'm trying to say that informing yourself, but doing in a critical way and not believing to everything is a second step. Once you realize that there is some work to do on yourself, and you start to do that work. Because then, with these two steps, you already have a lot of ground laid for having an informed decision around how to proceed for your own child, how to support the child, what kind of services or therapies or education to provide for him. So practically, if you want to call it a decision-making flow, in case you find yourself in the front of your child and the doctor says, okay, now this, we give him a label, him or her, a label, and it's autism or autism spectrum disorder, because it's a huge spectrum of manifestations, you will get very worried or even panicked. And I see many parents, when they get the diagnosis, they are completely like, what do I do now? Where should I go? What's the next step? And not all the system, not in all countries, you actually are guided by the medical system or educational system to do this and that. In many countries, you have to inform yourself and to make decisions for yourself, and you don't even have so much support, so you have to invest your own money for creating opportunities so your child can have a follow-up. But returning now, because now I'm going in a different direction, I want to go back to the topic of today, disconnected kids from disconnected parents. Or in this case, I spoke more about mothers, but fathers also can have a contribution. As I said, my son has a genetic change from the father that is inherited from the father. Always remember that your child is also a mirror to you, to the child you were once. And if you can learn from this mirroring and learn also to read those signs that the child shows to you, because most of the children, they are often very sensitive. They have telepathic skills. They can read the energies. They can read the thoughts in this case, right? They can be very empathic, although in many cases they have a social behavior, but at the level of receiving information from the other, they are very open. They have their own antennas, even if they are not visible. So if you start to notice this sensitivity in your child, and to understand that many of the times the behavior of the child, even if it's a tantrum, a meltdown, or a self-harming behavior, is showing you something that has relevance to also the way you relate to the child or to your past history, to your lineage, and so on. Look deeper into this. And I know that you might be a little bit puzzled by what I'm saying now, but I'll give you two examples so you can understand that what I'm saying is not invented. It's really reality. And the fact that we have tools to investigate this reality is really amazing, and it can be of support for many. So I got used quite early when I understand what was different with my son, and also with his degree of sensibility, that he always will show me something and that I have to pay attention to that something. I got used to search for help. And I already experimented with him different methods where I tried to understand if there is any energy that disturbs the field, and that he is able to understand that energy or disruption, and then he shows to me that I have to look into it better. And I can give two examples of this. So one time, a few years ago, I think 2 or 3 years ago, he was speaking a lot about gorillas. He's very fond of animals in general, but he prefers to look to them into a book or on YouTube in some channels that are with animals or fairy tales, and not so much real animals. But there was a time for several months he was very fond of gorillas, and he has so many gorilla toys at home, asking to buy more and speaking about them and drawing them. And then at a certain point I said, there is too much gorilla energy here. There is another meaning here. And so I took him to my therapist at that time, and we work with the IOPT method, which is identity-oriented psychotrauma therapy for my son. And he was very receptive and wanted to work with it. So he drew his intention, and it was a kind of, he wrote gorilla, but in reality was a different character that he would label as gorilla. And then me, the therapist, and him, we work the intention according to the method itself. This is also known as self-meeting method, because it helps you inquire parts of yourself that are inside yourself and that are usually split because of traumatic events. And it was a very interesting session, because at that time I was affected by a hidden dynamic, and a lot of anger was recurrent in my life. All sorts of conflicts from the past and that period that were coming around. And he showed to me that actually that energy of gorilla was related with this anger that I was suppressing. And one very interesting and relevant thing that happened in the session was when I represented part of his identity, and I understood his inner state. I could feel the loneliness, the longing for something, his desire to travel because he's passionate about traveling. He really loves it. And also the search for my presence. Because at that time, parts of me were still somehow still in split, and needed to come back and to recreate the whole, for me to be able to be more present for him, more emotionally available too. Because I'm present anyway. I'm a single parent. I'm 24 hours and 24 hours, with few exceptions, with him. But not always I was able to be emotionally present. I always provide for everything he needs, but sometimes I also tended to be distant or to be absorbed in other things, and he would feel it. And that was being able to interpret a part of him and to feel it, to understand what is inside him. It was a real eye-opener for me. And of course, from that intention, after we work it, the energy started to align a different way. And we faced each other with a different comprehension of what is there between us, and how we can connect even deeper. And then I have a more recent situation. I was last weekend in a workshop of constellation with him. And it was a training workshop from my former teacher, but I chose to go there because of him, because of my son, because again, he was showing me something. Several times he did a gesture. For privacy reason, I will not mention it. That raised a question in me, and I resonated that something was hidden behind what he was showing me. as he did that gestures repeatedly, and it was actually harmful gesture. I have to mention that now he's at puberty, and sometimes he has this self-harming behavior or some crisis where he becomes a little bit agitated and aggressive. But as I'm used with these situations, because they can happen quite often in this period, something in specific drew my attention. And then I said, oh, I cannot uncover this alone. I need support. So I went for this family constellation workshop, because there I was supported by a whole group working for each other. And it was another eye-opener, because in that constellation I could understand that what he was showing me was actually a hidden dynamic of victim and perpetrator, victim and abuser from my lineage. I don't know who were those people involved in dynamic, but in any case, I was looking and seeing the dynamic energetically and subconsciously. And I was somehow drawn towards the dynamic, but drawn towards those people who couldn't find their peace, that they were in the realm of the ghost, to say like that, in energetic level. There was an entanglement between me and other generations and their own conflicts. And a trauma, of course, because these conflicts usually generate trauma. Victim perpetrator energy is a traumatic entanglement. And so practically what the constellation brought up, it made sense, because I understood finally that my son was trying to show me how I was harming myself, but by getting entangled with those energies, with the trauma from the lineage. And it helped me, through the guidance of the facilitator, to get out of this hidden dynamic from the entanglement and accept to go in direction of the light, of exploring life with a different energy. Because my son knows that he needs me, healthy and happy and able to support him, so in a good, healthy state. So as you see with these two examples, I already showed to you that when we pay attention with these signs, or to these signs that our children show to us in their own attitudes or their own behavior, of course, not all behavior should be seen like that, but in most of the cases, if something disturbs them, is because they feel the disturbance in the family field or for the parent that is the closest to them. And usually mothers are those who are closest to these children, especially because there are many single mothers who have to cope with a life of difficulty and challenge with children on the spectrum. And I tell you these stories, which are quite personal, so you can reflect on your own experience. And if you need some guidance, I'm also here to support you, because I have the tools. I use these tools as a therapist. And I have the sensibility to know when something is hidden and when a child becomes a signal through their own symptom or behavior for something that needs to be seen and acknowledged. And it is not a joke, and it is not an exaggeration. It's a real story. There are stories of life that often they can trigger, or they have been triggered by entanglements and conflicts and weird dynamics in past generations. And we continue to bring them in our life, because the morphogenetic field works in this way. It's a field of information, and we are contributing to the field as much as other generations contribute too. And our children are the future generation that continues to propagate dynamic until someone chooses to look into it and to stop it. So reflect on this, on these two examples I brought, and understand, starts to listen, to pay attention to those little signs sometimes that your child gives to you. And even when the child has tantrums and meltdowns that seems like there is no apparent cause behind it, you might wish to investigate. because often this aggression or self-harming behavior comes also from discomfort that is the child feels, and that can be, I'm not saying all the times, but in many cases can be linked to a discomfort that we carry as parents. So look a little bit beyond the surface and see if your intuition tells you there is much more, as it happens with me, because I don't go to constellation every time my child shouts out or self-harms, because sometimes I understand it's just his own discomfort, but I go when I have those specific signs that there is something more out there beyond what he's showing me. So this will be the first step I was speaking about in that connection flow, if you want, like that, because you start more to develop this sense of understanding, of knowing, of feeling with your child, more you will realize you connect, and easier is for you to know what to do, what to explore, where to go to find those answers that you're seeking for. So yes, that was the topic of today. Maybe it was longer than other times, but it's just a way to raise awareness about how much is happening behind the scenes and we don't see, but we can find our own way on discovering and uncovering that hidden entanglements or hidden movements. And it might also be an eye-opener for you, or everything I'm telling you, because it's not something that you will find in mainstream, but it's based on life experience, on real experience, and on real development. I can see my son is very quiet these days once we came back from the workshop, because he was there with me, with the group. And now he also feels a difference in my own energy as I got out of the entanglement that was keeping me stuck in also on a very sad energy. It was the energy of losing motivation for life or doing something. And he could see it and he was not happy about it, right? So it's real life experience. And there are methods that are very effective, even if they are not considered the mainstream therapy for autism. And I'm not saying that they should be, because of course there are others that might be more important, especially if we deal with severe delays in the development of the child. But they can complement and they can support parents to connect more with themselves, with their own biography, and then find solutions, because the solutions are always there, but we need to look a little bit beyond the mere surface of our own reality and investigate. I always investigate. I'm a researcher by profession, so it's like a default mechanism I have. But I became trained in all these years, and it's already 12 years that my son is part of my life, and with him also the spectrum disorder of autism. I train myself to see something and to actually see the invisible, to seize what can be there behind the scenes. And I always investigate and search for solutions and answers. And if you think you have similar stories you want to share with me, I would be happy to have you as a guest. Or if you have any story that puzzles you at the moment with your children or child, and you want to look and investigate behind the scenes, I have tools that can support you in this. And I'm not bringing only an encouragement, but I'm bringing you the certainty that all these tools that can complement everything that you're already doing with and for your child. And even if they are not officially recognized, I don't think it matters as long as they work for you, to support you. So learn more about this. I will place some more resources in the description of the episode. Like and subscribe and share if you feel that this episode brings you useful information and encouragement. See you next time and have a blessed day. Bye.